Clean the spill, not the contract. Richard Whitmore's voice cracked across the boardroom like a whip. The laughter came instantly. Sharp. Polished. Expensive. Naomi Brooks froze beside the 20-foot walnut conference table, a white cleaning cloth clenched in her hand. The scent of fresh coffee hung in the air beneath the cold blast of central air conditioning. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered beneath a gray winter sky. Inside, 20 executives watched a billionaire humiliate a maid. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting the silver cufflink on his sleeve. "That is why we hire staff," he said, barely looking at her. "To clean messes? Not think." More laughter. Naomi lowered her eyes and knelt beside the spill. The hot coffee had spread across several pages of the acquisition contract lying near Richard's hand. She carefully dabbed the liquid away before it stained the paper. Her movements were calm. Controlled. Invisible. Just the way people like Richard preferred her. The projector hummed softly overhead. Key figures from a $3 billion land acquisition glowed on the massive screen behind him. Lawyers shifted in their seats. Advisors whispered numbers. Nobody noticed Naomi. Nobody ever did. Until her hand stopped moving. A single line near the bottom of the page caught her eye. At first she thought she had read it wrong. Her heartbeat stumbled. She blinked. Read it again. Then a third time. The room continued around her. Voices. Laughter. The scrape of expensive chairs. But everything sounded distant now. Her gaze remained fixed on one name printed near the final signature page. Brooks Family Trust. Heat rushed into her chest. Her father had spoken those words exactly once before he died. 12 years ago. In a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and rainwater. She remembered the tremble in his voice. The way he squeezed her hand. The way he told her never to forget that name. Naomi slowly stood. Richard was already signing preliminary approval documents. His fountain pen glided across paper worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. "Sir?" Her voice was quiet. Too quiet. Nobody heard her. Richard certainly did not. He continued speaking to his attorney. "Close the deal before the market opens tomorrow." Naomi swallowed. Her pulse hammered against her throat. "Sir?" This time several heads turned. Richard looked up with visible annoyance. "What?" The room fell silent. Naomi felt every eye land on her. The executives looked amused. Curious. Waiting for the maid to embarrass herself. Richard checked his watch. "Make it quick." Naomi glanced down at the contract one last time. Her fingers tightened around the damp cloth. "I do not think you can sell this land." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the projector seemed quieter. Then someone laughed. Another joined in. Richard's mouth curled into a smile. "You do not think?" he repeated. "And what exactly makes you qualified to think about a billion-dollar acquisition?" More laughter. Naomi's face burned, but she did not look away. She pointed at the contract. "Because that trust does not belong to your company." Richard's smile widened. "No? No, sir." A lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Richard leaned forward. "Then who does it belong to?" Naomi stared at the signature page. Her stomach twisted. She could barely hear herself speak. "I think it belongs to my family." The room exploded with laughter. Richard shook his head slowly as if witnessing something pathetic. "Security." 2 guards near the door immediately started forward. Naomi's heart dropped. But before either man could take a step, a sharp voice suddenly cut through the room. "Wait!" Every head turned. The lead attorney had gone pale. Her eyes were locked on the contract. She flipped to another page. Then another. Then another. The color drained from her face completely. Richard frowned. "Evelyn?" She did not answer. Her hand trembled as she reached the final attachment buried deep inside the acquisition file. The room held its breath. Then Evelyn looked up at Naomi with an expression that made Richard's smile disappear. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, before anyone signs another page. There is something here you need to see. The boardroom felt smaller somehow. Colder. The laughter that had filled the air seconds ago vanished beneath the low hum of the projector and the distant whine of traffic 30 floors below. Richard Whitmore remained seated, but the confidence in his posture had shifted. Just slightly. Evelyn Carter stared at the document as if it had suddenly become dangerous. Her fingers moved quickly through the pages. Paper whispered against paper. Nobody spoke. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat. One executive loosened his tie. Another leaned forward. Richard finally broke the silence. Evelyn. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Tell me what you found. Evelyn swallowed. This acquisition is not as straightforward as we believed. Richard's jaw tightened. Meaning? Evelyn slid one page across the table. The Brooks family trust was never dissolved. A murmur rolled through the room. Richard barely reacted. That is impossible. That is what I thought. Evelyn pointed toward a faded attachment buried deep inside the file. The trust remained active through an inheritance protection clause filed 12 years ago. Naomi's breath caught. 12 years. The exact year her father died. Richard stood up slowly. The leather chair rolled backward across the hardwood floor. Who inherited it? Nobody answered immediately. Evelyn's eyes drifted toward Naomi. The room followed. Dozens of eyes. Executives. Lawyers. Advisors. All staring at the woman they had been laughing at less than 2 minutes ago. Naomi suddenly felt exposed beneath the bright recessed lighting overhead. Richard noticed it too. His face hardened. Do not tell me this is about her. Evelyn hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The room erupted into whispers. Richard slammed his palm lightly against the table. Not violent. Just enough to silence everyone. Answer me. Evelyn took a slow breath. The primary beneficiary listed here is Naomi Denise Brooks. Complete silence. Naomi felt her knees weaken. For a second she wondered if she had misheard. Richard actually laughed. One short laugh. Sharp and disbelieving. No. Nobody joined him this time. Evelyn did not smile. The documentation appears legitimate. Richard stepped closer. Appears? I need verification. Then verify it. His voice echoed across the glass walls. Evelyn nodded quickly and reached for her phone. Around the table, faces changed. Not all at once. Slowly. The same people who had ignored Naomi moments ago now studied her like she had become part of the deal itself. Naomi hated it. She hated the sudden attention. The curiosity. The calculations behind their eyes. One executive whispered, How much land are we talking about? Another replied, Over 8,000 acres. The number landed like a bomb. Richard heard it too. Naomi saw the brief flicker behind his eyes. The first real sign of concern. Then something unexpected happened. A young associate rushed into the boardroom carrying a tablet. His face was pale. Ms. Carter. He handed it to Evelyn. I found additional records. Evelyn scanned the screen. Her expression changed instantly. What is it? Richard demanded. She looked up. There is more. The room went still again. The inheritance was not the only thing protected. Naomi felt a chill crawl up her spine. Evelyn rotated the tablet toward Richard. There is a sealed letter attached to the trust. Richard frowned. From who? Evelyn's voice dropped. Marcus Brooks. Naomi stopped breathing. Her father's name hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Richard stared at the screen. When was it written? 3 days before his death. Naomi's fingers trembled. She had never heard about any letter. Never. Not once. Evelyn clicked the file. The attachment opened. A scanned document appeared. The room leaned forward as one. Richard's eyes narrowed. Naomi could barely stand. Then Evelyn whispered 4 words that drained the color from every face in the room. "This changes everything." Richard reached for the tablet. "Read it." Evelyn looked at the first line and froze. Completely froze. Naomi saw it happen. The attorney who never showed emotion suddenly looked terrified. "Evelyn?" Richard said. No answer. "Evelyn." Slowly, she lifted her eyes from the screen and looked directly at Naomi. "Your father," she said quietly, "did not leave you land." The room held its breath. "He left you something far more valuable." The silence hit harder than any shout. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Naomi stared at Evelyn as the attorney's words echoed through the boardroom. Something far more valuable. Richard Whitmore stepped closer, the polished leather soles of his shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. "Read it." His voice was sharp now. Controlled, but barely. Evelyn looked back at the tablet. The glow from the screen reflected in her glasses. Her throat tightened. Around the table, executives exchanged nervous glances. One discreetly reached for his phone beneath the table. Another stopped him with a look. Nobody wanted to miss what was happening. Naomi felt the air pressing against her chest. Her father's name had not been spoken in rooms like this. Not by people like these. Evelyn finally began reading. "To whoever controls Whitmore Development after my death." Richard's expression changed instantly. "What?" Evelyn stopped. "That is the opening line." Richard snatched the tablet from her hand. His eyes raced across the screen. The confidence drained from his face line by line. Naomi noticed it before anyone else did. The billionaire who always had an answer suddenly looked uncertain. The room sensed it too. A low murmur spread through the executives. Richard read silently. Then again. His grip tightened around the tablet. "This is nonsense." Nobody responded. Evelyn folded her arms. "The document was notarized 12 years ago. Which means it existed before this acquisition ever began." Richard looked up sharply. "How would a maintenance worker know anything about my company?" Naomi flinched. Maintenance worker. Even now. Even after everything. But before she could answer, Evelyn spoke. "Perhaps because her father knew something." The room went silent again. Richard's jaw flexed. Naomi could feel dozens of eyes moving between them. "What exactly did Marcus Brooks know?" Richard asked. Evelyn hesitated. "According to this letter." She paused. "Marcus Brooks helped create Whitmore Development." The boardroom exploded. Chairs scraped. Voices overlapped. One executive nearly dropped his pen. Naomi felt her pulse hammering in her ears. Richard stood frozen. Completely frozen. "That is impossible," he said quietly. "Marcus Brooks was a mechanic. That is not what the records show." Evelyn tapped another file. 23 years ago he was listed as an original founding partner in a land investment venture that later became Whitmore Development. Richard's face lost color. Naomi's stomach twisted. Founding partner. She had never heard those words before. Not once. Her father had worked double shifts. Fixed trucks. Repaired generators. Their apartment had leaked every winter. Nothing about that sounded like a founder. Yet Evelyn kept scrolling. "There is more." The room leaned in again. Naomi's palms grew damp. Richard looked furious now. Dangerous not because he was loud, but because he was quiet. "Keep reading." Evelyn nodded. "Marcus Brooks transferred his ownership shares before his death." Richard exhaled sharply. Relief flashed across his face. Brief. Visible. "Then this changes nothing." For a moment, it seemed he was right. Several executives relaxed. Naomi felt disappointment crash into her chest. Then Evelyn reached the final page. Her eyes widened. "No." Richard looked up. "What now?" Evelyn swallowed. "The transfer was conditional." The room froze for the 3rd time that morning. "Conditional on what?" Richard demanded. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes. Conditional on the company meeting specific obligations to the Brooks family. Nobody spoke. Naomi could hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above the conference table. Richard stared. And? Evelyn's voice barely rose above a whisper. According to this agreement, if those obligations were ever broken. She stopped. Richard stepped forward. Finish the sentence. Evelyn looked directly at Naomi. Then back at Richard. Ownership reverts automatically. The room stopped breathing. Naomi felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Richard did not move. Did not blink. Did not speak. For the first time all morning, the billionaire looked afraid. Then a notification suddenly appeared on the tablet screen. Evelyn frowned and opened it. Her face turned pale again. Richard, she whispered. Someone just accessed the trust account. The room went dead silent. Naomi stared at the screen. The account had been dormant for 12 years. Yet somehow, at that exact moment, a new message appeared. Authorized user logged in. Beneath it was a single name. Naomi Denise Brooks. The notification remained on the screen like a lit fuse. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Authorized user logged in. Naomi Denise Brooks. The words glowed against the tablet's pale blue light. Richard Whitmore snatched the device from Evelyn's hands. That is not possible. His voice cracked for the first time all morning. The room heard it. Every executive. Every attorney. Every assistant standing silently along the wall. They all heard the crack. Naomi did too. Richard's fingers moved furiously across the screen. The polished steel of his watch reflected the overhead lights as he entered passwords, security codes, administrator credentials. Nothing worked. The trust account remained open. Active. Accessible. Under Naomi's name. A whisper moved through the boardroom. Then another. Several people quietly pulled out their phones. Tiny camera lenses appeared above conference tables and behind folders. The mood had shifted completely. This was no longer a routine acquisition. This was history unfolding in real time. Naomi stared at the screen. I never logged in. Richard looked up sharply. Convenient. The accusation hung in the air. Naomi felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her again. Suspicion now? Not curiosity. I am telling the truth. Truth? Richard laughed bitterly. You expect me to believe a maid accidentally walks into a boardroom and suddenly becomes heir to thousands of acres and a dormant trust worth hundreds of millions? Naomi opened her mouth, then stopped. Because deep down, she understood how insane it sounded. Evelyn stepped forward. Actually, there is another possibility. Richard's eyes narrowed. What? Evelyn pointed toward the screen. The login did not originate from this room. Silence. Someone else activated it. The room froze again. Richard looked back at the tablet. Who? Evelyn checked the audit trail. Her expression darkened immediately. I do not know. You do not know? The source is masked? A chill spread through the room. Even the executives who had been whispering moments earlier fell silent. Someone was watching. Someone had been watching all along. Naomi suddenly remembered something. A memory she had not touched in years. A small metal box. Her father's garage. The smell of motor oil and hot steel. Rain hitting the roof while he worked late into the night. Wait. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Richard rolled his eyes. Not now. My father had a box. Nobody reacted. Naomi's heartbeat accelerated. A lockbox. Evelyn immediately turned toward her. What kind of box? Metal. Naomi swallowed. He never let anyone touch it. Richard scoffed. This is ridiculous. But Naomi continued. The memory was becoming clearer now. Every month he checked it. What was inside? Evelyn asked. Naomi shook her head. I never knew. Richard slammed the tablet onto the table. Enough. The sound echoed across the room. We are discussing a $3 billion transaction, not childhood memories. Yet nobody was listening to him anymore. That realization hit him instantly. The attention in the room had shifted. Not completely, but enough. The billionaire who controlled every conversation was no longer controlling this one. Naomi saw it in his eyes. That frightened him more than the trust account. Evelyn opened another document. Richard. Her voice sounded different now. Careful. Measured. Dangerous. There is something else. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Almost as if he no longer wanted surprises. What now? Evelyn slowly rotated the tablet toward the room. The trust account was activated 12 minutes ago. Naomi frowned. 12 minutes? Exactly when she spoke up. Exactly when she challenged the contract. A low murmur spread across the room. Richard stared at the timestamp. Coincidence. But nobody sounded convinced. Evelyn zoomed in further. Then her face went pale. Completely pale. Naomi felt dread crawl up her spine. What? Richard demanded. Evelyn did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained locked on the screen. Evelyn. Finally she looked up. The account did not just activate. Richard froze. Then what happened? Evelyn swallowed hard. Around them, the room felt smaller. Colder. The city skyline beyond the glass walls seemed impossibly distant. Someone transferred assets out of the trust. Every sound vanished. Richard's face drained of color. How much? Evelyn looked down one last time. Then back up. All of it. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Voices collided. Phones came out openly now. Naomi stood motionless as the world around her exploded. Yet she barely heard any of it. Because at the bottom of the transfer record was a single line. A destination account. An account holder. And when Evelyn slowly read the name aloud, Naomi felt the blood leave her body. The recipient, Evelyn whispered, is Marcus Brooks. Her father had been dead for 12 years. That is impossible. Richard Whitmore's voice barely sounded human anymore. The words came out dry, strained, almost desperate. Across the boardroom, nobody argued. Nobody could. The name on the screen remained unchanged. Marcus Brooks. The dead man who had supposedly received hundreds of millions of dollars from a trust account that had not moved in 12 years. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass walls, but inside the room the air felt frozen. Naomi stood motionless. Her pulse hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Around her, phones were no longer hidden. Investors openly recorded. Attorneys exchanged alarmed looks. Someone near the back whispered, "This deal is finished." Richard heard it. His head snapped toward the speaker. "Nobody is leaving this room." Silence followed immediately. Yet the authority in his voice sounded weaker than before. Everyone noticed. Evelyn took the tablet back and began scrolling rapidly. The glow reflected across her face. "There has to be an explanation." Richard laughed bitterly. "Find one." Naomi watched the transfer records moving across the screen. Something felt wrong. Not impossible. Wrong. Like a machine making a sound nobody else noticed. A memory surfaced. Her father sitting at a workbench beneath a hanging lamp. Metal tools spread across old newspapers. The smell of oil. The hum of a generator. When something breaks, he had told her once, never look where everyone else is looking. Naomi suddenly stepped forward. Stop. Nobody reacted at first. Richard rubbed his forehead. Not now. Look at the timestamp. Evelyn frowned. What? Naomi pointed at the screen. The transfer. Evelyn zoomed in. The room leaned forward. Naomi's heartbeat accelerated. Look closer. Evelyn stared for several seconds. Then her eyes widened. Wait. Richard immediately grabbed the tablet. What? Evelyn pointed. The transfer happened 12 years ago. Silence. Complete silence. Richard blinked. What? The system only reported it today. Naomi felt every eye turn toward her. Someone wanted us to see it now. The room erupted again. Not with panic this time. With realization. Richard stared at the screen. His face tightened. Who? Nobody had an answer. Naomi swallowed. Her hands trembled. Yet the more she looked at the records, the more certain she became. Somebody had planned this. Every piece. The contract. The trust. The timing. Even her presence in the room. Richard suddenly pointed at her. You knew. The accusation landed like a slap. Several executives looked uncomfortable. Others nodded slowly. Naomi felt heat rush into her face. I did not. You show up. The trust activates. The money appears. The founder turns out to be your father. Richard took a step closer. And I am supposed to believe that is all coincidence? Naomi opened her mouth but stopped. Because she knew exactly how it looked. Richard saw the hesitation and pounced. Tell them the truth. The pressure was unbearable now. The room watched her. Investors. Lawyers. Security. The billionaire. All waiting. Naomi's throat tightened. For the first time all morning, she felt completely alone. Then a notification sound cut through the silence. Sharp. Electronic. Every head turned toward Evelyn's tablet. Another message had appeared. No sender. No company logo. No identification. Just a single encrypted file. Richard stared at it. Do not open that. Nobody moved. The message contained only 6 words. For Naomi Brooks. From your father. The room stopped breathing. Naomi felt her knees weaken. Richard's face lost what little color remained. That is not possible. But even he no longer sounded convinced. Evelyn looked at Naomi. Do you want me to open it? Naomi stared at the screen. Her father's name. Her father's message. 12 years after his death. Every instinct told her something enormous was waiting on the other side of that file. Something that could explain everything. Or destroy everything. Slowly, she nodded. Evelyn touched the screen. The encrypted file opened. A video began loading. Grainy. Old. Recorded years ago. The first frame appeared. The entire room froze. Because sitting in the video, staring directly into the camera, was Marcus Brooks. Alive. The video did not begin with a speech. It began with silence. Grain flickered across the screen. A faint hum filled the boardroom speakers. Somewhere in the recording, an old fluorescent light buzzed softly overhead. Marcus Brooks sat alone at a metal workbench. The camera quality was poor. The image shaky. Yet there was no mistaking him. Naomi felt her chest tighten. The room had been roaring seconds earlier. Now it was silent enough to hear the ventilation system moving air through the ceiling vents. Richard Whitmore did not sit down. He stood frozen beside the conference table, his eyes locked on the screen. For the first time all morning, he seemed afraid to look away. Marcus adjusted the camera. Behind him sat shelves lined with tools, faded blueprints, and metal lockboxes. The reflection of a work lamp shimmered across a steel cabinet. If you are watching this, Marcus said quietly, then something has gone wrong. Nobody moved. Naomi noticed several executives lowering their phones. Not because they had stopped recording. Because suddenly it felt inappropriate to hold them up. Marcus looked older than she remembered. Tired. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had been protecting a secret for too long. Naomi, he said. Her breath caught instantly. The room disappeared around her. If this reaches you, it means you finally found what they were never supposed to lose. Richard's jaw tightened. Marcus paused. He seemed to search for the right words. I wanted to tell you the truth years ago. Naomi felt tears threatening behind her eyes. She fought them back. Marcus had never spoken to her like this. Never directly. Never without holding something back. But there were people watching. The room stiffened. Evelyn glanced toward Richard. Richard pretended not to notice. Marcus continued. People with money. Lawyers. Investors. Men who thought ownership was more important than honor. Nobody breathed. Richard slowly folded his arms. Defensive now. Uncomfortable. The silence around him grew heavier. Marcus reached into a drawer and removed a thin folder. The trust was never about the land. Naomi frowned. Around the room, several executives exchanged confused looks. Marcus held up a document. The land was bait. Complete silence. Evelyn leaned closer to the screen. Marcus looked directly into the camera. The real asset was hidden somewhere nobody thought to look. Naomi's pulse accelerated. Even Richard shifted slightly. The billionaire who had spent hours trying to protect a multi-billion-dollar acquisition suddenly looked like a man who had realized he was playing the wrong game. Marcus lowered the document. They thought they won. His voice softened. They thought I gave everything away. Naomi saw something change in the room. The executives were no longer looking at Richard. They were looking at her. Not with pity. Not with amusement. Something else. Respect. Curiosity. Maybe even guilt. Richard noticed it too. That seemed to bother him more than the video itself. Marcus smiled faintly. But ownership is not always what people think it is. The old video crackled briefly. Static flashed across the screen. Then Marcus looked off camera. Just for a second. Like he had heard something. Naomi saw it immediately. Fear. Not panic. Not terror. Awareness. The kind of fear that comes when someone knows time is running out. If Richard Whitmore is in the room when you watch this. Every head turned instantly. Richard froze. Completely froze. The boardroom became so quiet Naomi could hear someone else's phone vibrating against polished wood. Marcus continued. Then he deserves the chance to hear the truth too. Richard stared at the screen. His face unreadable. Marcus took a long breath. Because Richard was not the man who betrayed me. The room stopped breathing. Naomi blinked. Evelyn looked stunned. Several executives exchanged confused glances. Richard himself looked like he had forgotten how to move. For a moment, nobody understood. Then Marcus slowly looked into the camera one last time. The person responsible was sitting beside him. The video froze. Black screen. Silence. Then a new file automatically appeared beneath the recording. One name. One unopened attachment. And when Evelyn read the label aloud, Richard's face lost every trace of color. Chairman Emeritus William Whitmore. Chairman Emeritus William Whitmore. The name hung over the boardroom like a storm cloud. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The city lights beyond the glass walls shimmered against the darkening afternoon sky, but inside the room every eye was fixed on the screen. Richard Whitmore stared at the attachment as if it had become a loaded weapon. The muscles in his jaw tightened. For the first time all day, the billionaire looked smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. Human. Naomi noticed it immediately. The confidence. The certainty. The effortless control that had filled every room he entered. It was gone. Evelyn slowly opened the file. A soft electronic tone echoed through the speakers. Then another document appeared. Old. Scanned. Dated 23 years earlier. Several investors leaned forward. One attorney quietly removed his glasses. Richard's breathing grew heavier. Read it, someone whispered. Evelyn hesitated. Then she began. Private partnership agreement between William Whitmore and Marcus Brooks. The room froze. Naomi felt her heartbeat slow instead of accelerate. Something inside her was changing. The fear that had followed her all morning was fading. Not because the answers were clear. Because for the first time, the truth was finally surfacing. Evelyn continued reading. Original ownership allocation. 50% William Whitmore. 50% Marcus Brooks. Audible gasps rippled across the room. Richard closed his eyes briefly. The reaction told Naomi everything. He had never seen this document before. Neither had anyone else. Evelyn turned another page. Her voice became quieter. Additional clause. The room leaned in. In the event of fraudulent transfer, concealment of ownership, or deliberate removal of partner rights, all controlling interests shall revert to the Brooks family and their designated heirs. Silence. Complete silence. Naomi heard someone's phone slip from their hand and land softly on the carpet. Nobody looked away from the screen. Richard slowly sat down. The leather chair creaked beneath him. He looked like a man watching a lifetime of assumptions collapse one document at a time. No, one executive whispered. That cannot be real. It is notarized, Evelyn replied. Twice. Another executive stared at Naomi. Not the maid. Not the employee. Naomi Brooks. The room was beginning to understand the difference. Richard looked up. His face was pale beneath the cold boardroom lights. My father never told me any of this. Nobody answered. Because everyone believed him. The realization spread through the room like wildfire. Richard had not been protecting a lie. He had inherited one. Naomi watched the investors exchange uneasy looks. The humiliation she had felt only hours ago now seemed to drift silently across the room toward entirely different shoulders. Yet she felt no satisfaction. Only sadness. Marcus had been right. Richard was not the man who betrayed him. Evelyn opened the final page. Her eyes widened. There is another attachment. The room collectively held its breath. What is it? Richard asked quietly. The anger was gone now. Replaced by something much heavier. Evelyn clicked the file. A grainy photograph appeared on the screen. Naomi immediately recognized the workshop behind Marcus. The same metal shelves. The same workbench. But this time he was not alone. A younger William Whitmore stood beside him. Both men were smiling. Both shaking hands. Friends. Partners. Brothers in everything except blood. The room stared in disbelief. Years of assumptions shattered in a single image. Richard slowly stood and approached the screen. His reflection merged with the photograph. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the image of his father. Why would he hide this? He whispered. Nobody had an answer. Then Naomi noticed something nobody else had. A small object sitting on the workbench behind the two men. The metal lockbox. Her father's lockbox. The same one from her childhood memories. The same one he guarded for years. Her pulse quickened. Wait. Everyone turned toward her. Naomi stepped closer to the screen. The room parted without realizing it. No one interrupted. No one laughed. No one questioned her. Zoom in. Evelyn obeyed immediately. The image expanded. The lockbox filled the screen. Dusty. Ordinary. Except for one detail. A handwritten label attached to the side. Naomi's breath caught. Richard saw it too. The room watched in complete silence. Written across the label in faded black marker were 4 simple words. For Naomi. Open last. Nobody spoke. Then another notification appeared at the bottom of the screen. A new file. Timestamped 1 minute earlier. The sender field contained no name. Only a single message. The lockbox has been found. The message stayed on the screen. The lockbox has been found. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody even seemed to know how. The boardroom that had spent hours drowning in arguments, accusations, and panic now sat in a silence so complete that the faint vibration of an air vent sounded loud. Naomi stared at the screen. Her father's handwriting. His photograph. His voice. The lockbox. One piece after another had emerged from the shadows, and with every revelation, the room seemed to shift further beneath everyone's feet. Richard Whitmore remained standing beside the conference table. The reflection of the city lights shimmered across the glass behind him. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. The billionaire who had entered the room believing he controlled a $3 billion acquisition now looked like a man trying to understand his own family. Evelyn quietly lowered the tablet. Nobody reached for it. Nobody wanted to be the first to break the moment. Then an investor near the end of the table slowly stood. The movement drew every eye. He looked at Naomi. Not Richard. Not Evelyn. Naomi. Miss Brooks. His voice was calm. Respectful. The change was impossible to miss. Hours earlier she had been invisible. Then she had been a problem. Then a suspect. Now an entire room of executives waited for her reaction. Naomi swallowed. The attention felt heavier than the humiliation ever had. "I do not know any more than you do," she said quietly. The honesty landed harder than confidence could have. Several people exchanged looks. Nobody doubted her. Not anymore. Another executive spoke. "You knew there was something wrong before any of us." Naomi looked down briefly. "My father always said people miss the truth when they only look at money." A faint silence followed. Not because the statement was profound. Because everyone in the room realized exactly how true it had become. Richard slowly walked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. His hands rested on the back of a chair. For several seconds he said nothing. The room watched him. Waiting. Finally he spoke. "I called you a maid." Nobody moved. Richard kept staring out at the skyline. "I laughed when you questioned the contract." Naomi said nothing. The room seemed afraid to breathe. Richard's reflection stared back at him from the glass. "And all day, I kept asking how someone like you could possibly know what we missed." His voice grew quieter. "Turns out you were the only one paying attention." The words settled over the room like snowfall. No excuses. No defense. Just truth. Naomi felt something unexpected. Not victory. Relief. The tension that had lived inside her chest since she walked into the boardroom finally began to loosen. Across the room, several executives lowered their eyes. Others looked openly embarrassed. They remembered the laughter. The smirks. The assumptions. They remembered exactly where they had been standing when they decided Naomi did not belong. Richard finally turned around. The expression on his face had changed completely. "Miss Brooks." The title sounded strange coming from him. Respectful. Earned. "I owe you an apology." Nobody had expected him to say it. The silence afterward felt almost sacred. Naomi met his gaze. For the first time all day, there was no battle between them. Only two people standing inside a truth neither of them had created. "My father taught me something too," Richard said quietly. "He always said character reveals itself when power disappears." His eyes drifted toward the photograph of William Whitmore and Marcus Brooks. "I think I finally understand what he meant." Around the room, cameras continued recording, but nobody seemed interested in social media anymore. This had become something else. Something personal. Something human. Evelyn's phone vibrated softly against the table. The sound felt strangely loud. Every head turned. She glanced down at the screen. Her expression shifted immediately. The warmth that had begun returning to the room vanished. Naomi saw it happen. "What is it?" Richard asked. Evelyn looked up slowly. The color had drained from her face again. "The lockbox was not found today." Silence returned. Heavy. Immediate. "Then when?" Naomi asked. Evelyn swallowed. Her eyes moved from the message to Naomi. 3 weeks ago." The room froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. 3 weeks. Someone had already found the lockbox. Someone had already seen whatever was inside. Then Evelyn opened the attached update beneath the message. A single line appeared on the screen. Naomi felt her heartbeat stop. Because beneath the timestamp was another sentence. Lockbox contents removed. Current location unknown. The words remained on the screen long after anyone wanted to read them. Lockbox contents removed. Current location unknown. Yet somehow the panic that would have consumed the room hours earlier never came. The storm had already passed. What remained was something quieter, heavier. The city outside had begun to glow with the soft gold of evening. Sunlight reflected across the glass walls and stretched long shadows across the conference table where a billionaire, a group of executives, and a woman they once ignored now sat in silence. Naomi stood near the window. The skyline shimmered beyond her reflection. For the first time all day, nobody was watching her because they doubted her. They were watching because they respected her. Richard Whitmore slowly approached the photograph still frozen on the screen. William Whitmore and Marcus Brooks. Partners. Friends. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he looked at Naomi. I spent my entire life protecting my father's legacy. His voice was quiet. Honest. Turns out I never knew the whole story. Naomi said nothing. She understood that some truths arrived too late to argue with. Richard lowered his eyes briefly. The room noticed. Men like Richard Whitmore rarely looked down. Your father deserved better. The words landed softly. No dramatic apology. No performance. Just truth. Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat. Not because she had won. Because for the first time someone in that room had finally spoken about Marcus Brooks the way he deserved. Around the table, executives slowly closed their laptops. Phones disappeared. Nobody cared about the acquisition anymore. The numbers that had seemed so important that morning now felt strangely small. Evelyn stepped forward holding a folder. We traced the final transfer route. The room listened, but quietly now. The assets were not stolen. Richard frowned. Then where did they go? Evelyn looked at Naomi. A faint smile touched her face. Scholarships. Naomi blinked. What? Evelyn opened the report. Thousands of them. The room went still. Over 12 years, the trust funded educational grants, trade apprenticeships, housing assistance programs, and small business loans. Naomi felt her chest tighten. Marcus Brooks had not hidden wealth. He had given it away. Piece by piece. Family by family. Life by life. Richard stared at the numbers. Hundreds of recipients. Entire communities. Dreams funded. Businesses launched. Children educated. All through a trust nobody knew existed. The billionaire slowly sat down. His eyes never left the report. He could have made himself rich. Evelyn nodded. Instead, he made other people possible. Silence followed. Deep and complete. Naomi looked toward the photograph again. Suddenly the mystery of the missing lockbox felt different. Smaller somehow. Maybe what mattered most had never been inside it. Maybe Marcus had already left behind exactly what he wanted people to find. The room understood it too. Not all at once. But gradually. Like sunlight spreading across a dark floor. Richard stood again. This time he walked toward Naomi. No audience. No performance. Just two people standing in the quiet aftermath of a very long day. He extended something toward her. The silver fountain pen he had used to sign every major deal of his career. The same pen that had hovered above the contract when all of this began. Naomi looked at it. Then at him. What is this? Richard's expression softened. A contract should have started with your name. The room fell silent again. Naomi accepted the pen. Not because it symbolized power. Because it symbolized respect. The thing she had been denied from the beginning. Outside, the last light of day washed the skyline in gold. The hum of the buildings seemed distant now. The tension that had filled every corner of the boardroom had finally faded away. Richard glanced toward the photograph of Marcus and William one last time. I think they would have wanted us to do better than this. Naomi followed his gaze. Then we should. No applause followed. No celebration. No dramatic speeches. Just a room full of people sitting quietly with the truth. A few moments later, Naomi walked toward the exit carrying nothing except the pen and the memory of her father. The executives stood as she passed. Every one of them. Not because they were told to. Because they chose to. Naomi paused at the doorway. Warm evening light spilled across the floor behind her. She looked back once. Richard remained standing beside the photograph. Head lowered. Thoughtful. Changed. Then Naomi smiled softly and stepped into the hallway. The door closed gently behind her. And in the fading reflection of the boardroom glass, the name everyone had overlooked that morning seemed to linger longer than any contract ever could. Marcus Brooks.